Today we're going to look into topic 4.1 of AP Psychology. This is an introduction to learning. Have you ever wondered why you remember some things and forget others? Why you behave in a certain way? Imagine you're on a great adventure, trekking through the dense jungle of the human mind, where every turn uncovers a new mystery. This is the study of learning from a psychological perspective. It's a journey that seeks to unravel the intricate ways in which we acquire, retain, and apply knowledge and skills. Learning is not just about memorizing facts for an exam or mastering a new recipe. It's a fundamental part of our existence. It shapes our behaviors, molds our personalities, and influences how we perceive the world around us. From the moment we are born, we are constantly learning, adapting, and evolving, driven by an insatiable curiosity to understand and make sense of the world. Now let's delve into the psychology of learning, an exciting realm where biology and environment dance in a complex ballet, shaping who we are and who we become. This field of study investigates how we learn, why we learn, and what happens in our brain when we learn. It's about understanding the processes that enable us to adapt and thrive in an ever-changing environment. In this grand expedition, we will encounter some of the greatest minds in psychology, pioneers who dedicated their lives to unraveling the mysteries of learning. We'll meet the likes of Albert Bandura, Ivan Pavlov, Robert Rescorla, B.F. Skinner, Edward Thorndike, Edward Tolman, John B. Watson, and John Garcia. These trailblazers have left an indelible mark on our understanding of learning, each contributing unique insights that continue to shape the field today. So buckle up, fellow explorers. As we delve deeper into the mysteries of learning, we'll meet some of the greatest minds that have shaped our understanding of this fascinating subject. We'll brave the uncharted territories of the human mind, navigating through complex theories, groundbreaking experiments, and intriguing phenomena. Are you ready for the journey of a lifetime? The adventure begins now. From Pavlov's dogs to Bandura's social learning theory, let's uncover the stories of the pioneers who shaped the psychology of learning. First off, Albert Bandura, a man known for his social learning theory. He proposed that learning is a social process, and we learn from observing others. His famous Bobo doll experiment showed us how children learn aggressive behavior by imitating adults. Then there's Ivan Pavlov, a Russian physiologist who gave us the concept of classical conditioning. His experiments with dogs led to the discovery that a neutral stimulus can be associated with a significant one, triggering a similar response. Robert Rescorla, another significant figure, further developed Pavlov's classical conditioning theory. He proposed that there's more to conditioning than mere association. It's the predictability of an event, he argued, that leads to learning. We can't forget B.F. Skinner, the man behind operant conditioning. Skinner showed us that behavior is strengthened or weakened by its consequences. His Skinner box experiment with rats and pigeons is a classic in the field. Edward Thorndike, a pioneer in operant conditioning, introduced the law of effect. He believed that responses followed by satisfaction will be repeated, whereas those followed by discomfort will not. Edward Tolman, on the other hand, proposed a cognitive perspective to learning. His experiments with rats in mazes showed us that learning is not just about stimulus and response, but also about the mental representation of the environment. John B. Watson, a staunch behaviorist, believed that all behaviors are learned. His controversial Little Albert experiment demonstrated that fear could be conditioned. Lastly, John Garcia, who showed us that not all associations are created equal. His research on taste aversion in rats demonstrated that some associations are biologically predisposed to be learned more easily than others. These researchers, through their groundbreaking experiments, have built the foundations of our understanding of learning. Their work continues to influence how we perceive and approach learning, both in educational settings and in our everyday lives. Graphs and charts may seem daunting, but they hold the key to understanding the results of learning experiments. Let's crack this code together, shall we? Imagine a graph as a visual storyteller narrating the tale of a learning experiment. The x-axis, our timeline, chronicles the progression of time or the number of trials. The y-axis, on the other hand, is our protagonist's development, showcasing changes in behavior or learning outcomes. Take, for instance, a simple line graph depicting a rat's learning in a maze. As trials increase along the x-axis, the number of errors made by the rat decreases on the y-axis, illustrating a learning curve. Bar graphs, conversely, compare different groups or conditions. If we have two groups of students, one taught with method A and the other with method B, a bar graph would visually represent which method results in better test scores. With a little practice, you'll soon be deciphering these graphs like a pro. Ever had an aha moment or learned something without even realizing it? That's the magic of insight and latent learning. Let's dive into these fascinating concepts, shall we? Insight learning is often described as a sudden realization of a solution to a problem. Imagine you're struggling with a complex puzzle and suddenly you've got it. That's insight learning in action. It's not a result of trial and error, but rather a flash of understanding that seemingly comes out of nowhere. Now imagine driving to a new location. The first time you may need a map or GPS to guide you. After a few trips, you find yourself knowing the way without needing directions. This is a perfect example of latent learning. It's learning that occurs without any obvious reinforcement. Interestingly, you might not even realize you've learned something until you need to use that information. Lastly, let's talk about social learning. Ever noticed how children often mimic the actions of adults around them? That's social learning in a nutshell. It's the process of learning behaviors and norms by observing and imitating others. Albert Bandura, a key researcher in the psychology of learning, demonstrated this with his famous Bobo doll experiment. To put it simply, social learning is all about learning from others. It's why we often pick up habits, skills, and even attitudes from the people we interact with. So, to sum up, insight learning is that sudden aha moment when you solve a problem. Latent learning is the unconscious knowledge you acquire without immediate reinforcement. And social learning is the process of learning by observing and imitating others. Each of these forms of learning plays a unique role in how we acquire knowledge and skills, shaping us into the individuals we are. From sudden insights to unconscious learning, the brain's capacity to learn and adapt is truly remarkable. Learning principles aren't just theoretical. They explain much of our emotional responses, our quirks, and even our fears. Let's dive right into the fascinating world of applied psychology. First off, emotional learning. It's the process that allows us to recognize and respond appropriately to our emotions. Imagine this: you're about to give a presentation. Your heart races, palms sweat, your body's reaction to anxiety. But over time, with repeated exposure, you learn to control these feelings. That's emotional learning in action. Next, let's talk about taste aversion. Ever had that one food you can't stand because of a bad experience? Maybe that dodgy sushi you had last summer, or that time you got sick after eating too much chocolate cake. This is your brain associating the taste with the unpleasant experience, a perfect example of taste aversion. Moving on to something a bit more mysterious, superstitious behavior. Ever wondered why some athletes wear the same socks for every game? Or why people avoid walking under ladders? These behaviors are often born out of coincidental associations. Scored a goal while wearing those lucky socks? Your brain makes a connection, and voila, a superstition is born. Lastly, let's tackle learned helplessness. Imagine you're stuck in traffic, late for work. No matter what you do, you can't change the situation. Over time, you might stop trying to find alternative routes and accept being late as inevitable. This feeling of powerlessness is known as learned helplessness. These principles are more than just theories in a textbook. They're part of our daily lives, shaping our behaviors and emotions in ways we often don't realize. Next time you experience a strong emotional response or feel a weird craving, remember, it's all a part of the fascinating process of learning. Not all learning is equal. Our biology can predispose us to learn some things more easily than others. Take, for instance, our innate fear of certain animals like snakes or spiders. This is a prime example of a biological predisposition that steers our learning. We're naturally inclined to learn to fear these creatures because over the course of evolution, those who feared and avoided such dangers were more likely to survive and pass on their genes. Another fascinating example is language acquisition in children. Young children are biologically primed to pick up languages with an ease that diminishes as we grow older. This critical period for language learning is a biological constraint that shapes our learning capacities. Then there's the Garcia effect, or taste aversion, named after researcher John Garcia. He found that we're biologically predisposed to associate sickness with food, allowing us to avoid potentially harmful substances in the future. So, the next time you find it easier to learn one thing over another, Remember, your biology could be playing a part. About 60% of how we learn is biological. That doesn't mean the 40% that is not cannot make an extraordinary impact. We'll look further into classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and observational learning. Can you imagine what you would do if you learned 40% better? Tell us in the comments, like the video, and subscribe to our channel for psychology inside and outside of the classroom.